What if I told you there once stood a house so haunted, so soaked in mystery, that even seasoned investigators were too terrified to stay the night, where messages appeared on the walls in ghostly handwriting, where spirits walked the halls in broad daylight, and where a nun, centuries dead, still roamed the grounds searching for a forbidden love? This is the story of Borley Rectory, known to many as the most haunted house in England. The story of Borley Rectory begins in 1862, when it was built by Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull. He wanted it to serve as the rectory for the nearby Borley Church, and also to house his family. Located in the village of Borley in Essex, the rectory was meant to be a place of peace, but who knew that it would instead become a house of terrors? As soon as the Bull family moved in, strange events began to unfold. They reported phantom footsteps across empty hallways, things moving on their own, and a phantom coach driven by a headless horseman. Years later, the Bulls and some locals even reported seeing a ghostly nun walking the garden path. Whenever anyone tried approaching her, she vanished into thin air. Perhaps out of denial or stubborn faith, the Reverend kept brushing off the reports and incidents and continued living at the rectory with his family. However, his children grew up in fear. Several of them later claimed that the house was plagued by ghosts their entire childhood. Of all the apparitions at Borley, the ghostly nun stands out. Her story is as tragic as it is chilling. According to legends, there was a young nun who lived at the nearby convent many centuries ago. She fell in love with a monk at the now-lost Borley Monastery. They planned to elope and flee to a new life. However, their plan was discovered. The monk was executed, and the nun? She was bricked up alive inside the convent walls. Now, whether that's actual history or just folklore remains unclear, but it's an undeniable fact that people started reporting sightings of the nun just after the rectory was built. In fact, she was most often seen along a path that came to be known as the Nun's Walk. People who've seen her say that she never speaks and never acknowledges the living, but she leaves the air unnaturally cold and with a deep, aching sense of sorrow. Reverend Bull and his family lived at Borley Rectory for over 40 years. During that time, reports of strange phenomena only increased. And they were the kind of reports you'd expect from a classic haunted house. Doors would lock themselves, bells used to summon servants would ring on their own, objects would disappear only to turn up in impossible places. Furniture would shift without cause. One of Bull's daughters described seeing a headless man from her bedroom window at night. Guests reported being touched by invisible hands. Even skeptics were left shaken. After Reverend Bull's death in 1892, his son Harry took over. He too reported sightings, though, like his father, he refused to abandon the house. In 1928, a new rector, Reverend Guy Eric Smith, and his wife moved in, and almost immediately, the haunting turned violent. It was as if the house was reacting to the change of residents. One day, to her horror, Mrs. Smith found a box containing a skull wrapped in brown paper in a cupboard. Soon after, she began hearing whispers and footsteps. Lights would flicker, and she even reported seeing a figure in black standing in the garden, just watching. The Smiths were terrified. They reached out to the Daily Mirror, which sent a reporter, a man who would turn Borley Rectory into legend, Harry Price. Harry Price was a famous and controversial psychical researcher. He arrived in June 1929 with cameras, notepads, and a flair for the dramatic. Almost immediately, he reported poltergeist activity, objects shattering, things being thrown around, ghostly writings on walls, and taps on the shoulders from invisible hands. He even claimed to make contact with spirits through seances. One message warned that the house would be destroyed by fire. This scared the heck out of the Smiths, and they left the rectory for good. Price would return nearly a decade later, in 1937, renting the house for a full year. He brought in 48 carefully chosen volunteers, including professionals and students, to document everything. They witnessed strange lights, bell ringing from empty rooms, and even sightings of the nun, now seen not only outside, but inside the house. In February 1939, the prophecy of the house being destroyed by fire came true. The rectory, now owned by Captain W.H. Gregson, caught fire after he accidentally overturned an oil lamp. Within minutes, the rectory's dry, timbered interior became an inferno. The fire spread quickly, fueled by years of neglect and dust-choked floorboards. But what truly made the fire legendary were the eyewitness accounts. Witnesses claimed they saw ghostly figures in the flames. Some even heard a woman screaming in the upstairs window as if crying out for help. And a man with hollow eyes was seen watching the flames without fear. Interestingly, an earlier rectory that stood on this very site before the Borley Rectory was constructed had been destroyed by fire too in 1841. Coincidence? I think not. Borley Rectory was never restored. In 1944, what remained of it was demolished, but its legend lived on. So, was Borley Rectory really haunted? Critics say that Harry Price exaggerated many of his claims. Some witnesses later admitted to hoaxing events for attention. In 1956, nearly a decade after Price's death, the Society for Psychical Research published a 200-page report that criticized Price's methods. They wrote, "It is difficult to escape the conclusion that much of the phenomena were either exaggerated or invented by Mr. Price himself. But believers point to the sheer volume of reports, dozens of people over decades, many with nothing to gain. They point out that long before Price arrived, residents had independently reported strange sights, noises, and apparitions. Ultimately, Borley Rectory became the battleground for the modern ghost debate, between believers in the supernatural and those demanding scientific proof. To this day, no consensus has been reached. The house is gone now. No walls, no windows, no doors. But on stormy nights, some say you can still hear footsteps echoing through the weeds, and see a figure in white walking the garden path, never stopping, never resting. The nun is still searching." So, what's your take? Was Borley Rectory truly haunted, or just the most elaborate ghost story ever told? Share your thoughts down in the comments. And if you crave more journeys into the strange, the unsolved, and the otherworldly, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. I am the boy who ponders, and I'll see you in the next mystery.